This week on Intrigued Full Effect.
Time just stopped. The day that I watched her walk into her boss's house is the last memory of seeing her that I have.
I'm Chandrea Thomas, and welcome to episode 32. In this podcast, I talk about curious cases, disappearances, and other stuff. And in this season 2 finale, I'm talking about the curious case and disappearance of 18-year-old Cleashindra Hall from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. On Monday, May 9th, 1994, her mother dropped her off at around 5 p.m. at her job at the 5000 block of Fawcett Road. That's where she did office work for a doctor at his home. And when she didn't come home that night, family members say they were told by her employer that she clocked out at 8:30 and left, and she hasn't been seen since. All of this just weeks away from her high school graduation. I spoke to Clea's mother, Laurel, about that night 26 years ago and how she's continuing her search to this day. This is what happened. Laurel, tell me what happened with your daughter, Clea, on May of 1994. Was it May 9th?
May 9th, 1994.
Yeah, what happened that day?
It started as a typical day. They get up, my kids got up, got ready for school, and I took them to school. Well, Clea was a senior, so if they had a job, they could get out early. When I took her to her job, which is about a mile from our house, there was no one there, so she came home, laid down on the couch, took a nap. And then a little before 5, her boss's wife called and said she was home and she could come over. And Clea got up off the couch. I just kind of wiped the sleep out of her eye and got in the car. And I dropped her off, watched her walk into her job. And that was the last time that I actually saw her.
And was there anything unusual about this particular day? Was there anything different about this day? Was it pretty much a run-of-the-mill type situation? Or was there something different?
Other than the fact that she was going to work earlier than she normally goes, there wasn't anything different about the day. Because normally she would go after school, but since she got out early, she was going to go early.
So she goes to work and everything's, she goes to work, she does her normal thing that she can imagine. And then you just normally just would expect for her to show up, in a few hours or whatever. But when she doesn't, how do you discover that she's nowhere to be found?
Well, about 8 o'clock, Clea called home and my son and I both picked up the phone. I picked up the extension. I didn't say anything. And she said, anybody call? And my son said no. And so she said, okay, bye. And, just hung up, which that wasn't unusual. And so I was reading, I fell asleep. Well, my husband came in about 12:45 a.m. And so he had a habit of checking everybody's room to make sure that everybody was okay. And he came in and woke me up and he says, Clea still at work? And so I was asleep. I hopped up and I went to look in the room and I'm like, no, I guess, because she didn't call. So I got on, so I came in and I didn't even know the number. I had to look it up in the phone book and I called and her boss answered it on the first ring. And I said, is Clea still there? And he's like, no. She left at 8:30. And I said, who did she leave with? And he said, I don't know. I just heard the door close and the garage go down like she always does. But let me go check her timesheet. So he went, put the phone down. He came back and he said, yeah, she signed out at 8:30. And I'm like, well, who could she have left with? And he's like, I don't know. And so, of course, just like most moms, I stayed up because I'm thinking, okay, she's the senior about to graduate and maybe she's trying to flex her independence. It's not like her to stay out, but it's possible. So I waited up all night, because I'm like, I can't wait till she gets home. And but she didn't come. And so when my sons got up to go to school, and I'm just going on, I ain't letting you ask me no questions, am I? But when she got,
that's all right. That's all right.
Okay. When my sons got up to go to school, and they was like, where's Clea? I'm like, I don't know where Clea is. She didn't come home. And so my middle son was in the 10th grade at the time, but both of them were in senior band. And so when he got to school, he called home and he said, Mom, she's not at school. And he said, maybe she went, because the seniors went to the elementary school to play. So maybe she went with them. And when they come back, I'll call you. And so he called me around lunchtime and he said she wasn't with the band. So, of course, now I'm really scared because I don't know what has happened. So I called the police, and that was during the time right before you didn't have to wait the 48 hours, or 24 hours. But anyway, I had to wait 24 hours before I could file a report. And they didn't even take me seriously when I filed a report. When I gave it to the guy, he just kind of half-heartedly took it and, and said, okay, we'll call you or something like that. And so we came home and right away we printed some flyers and we hand wrote our phone number on there. If you see her, call us on these flyers, and we started handing them out. And it was like the next couple of days after that, when we still didn't hear anything, that I contacted the news people.
At what point did the police finally, I guess, as you say, take this situation seriously and really start, I guess, searching for her? Or what happened after that?
They went to the school and talked to the school, and one of the detectives told me that if she had been a troublemaker at school or something like that, they wouldn't have done anything. But the fact that she was a good student and didn't get in trouble, they thought, this doesn't sound right. And, and I guess the school thought it didn't sound right, but I still don't think that they took it as serious because they didn't even check her locker. When the school was cleaning out lockers at the end of the school term 2 weeks later, her stuff was still in her locker, and they called the police and and they asked if they wanted those things that were in her locker. I don't know what that was, even to this day, what was in her locker. But I know that when she got up from the couch and left here, she didn't have anything, no purse, no driver's license, no ID, nothing. She just got up and went to work.
So to this day, do you guys still have her purse and all of her stuff from that day, like her license or any of that?
No, the police have all of that.
Oh, so they have all of that. They also have the contents of her locker that you have no idea of what those things are. So from our previous conversation, I know that you kind of felt like, that you don't believe that the police kind of handled the situation the way that you think they should have. What would you say to that at this point? I mean, it's been, like you said, 26 years since your daughter, disappeared. How do you feel about how the investigation has gone with what's happened with her?
There's some things that I think they could have done differently. And earlier in the investigation, when I said something to that effect to one of the detectives, he said, "Oh, Miss Hall, you watch too much television. Real life doesn't work like those crime shows because, they can solve them in an hour. And so real life doesn't work like that." Usually the last person to see somebody is the first person that you start talking to and work your way backwards. But that's not exactly, how they did. And I don't even think, or I don't even know if I believe that they think something happened to her, because I tried to get the state police to take over the investigation, because we're not a small town. I think we were 50,000 at that time. The state police said they thought that our local police were doing all that they could do, or had done what they could do. I don't know what more they could have done other than start from the beginning, eliminating suspects or persons of interest, I'll say.
So your daughter disappeared on May the 9th, 1994. That evening, you guys finally get a police report done within the next day or two. The police finally get this report and these things going. Did you go over to where she was working and talk to those people yourself, or like what happened with your communication with them, her friends, like who she may have had contact with? What happened with that?
We went to talk to one friend. There was a guy that was a friend of hers. We went to talk to him to see if he had seen her, and he said no, he hadn't seen her. And we briefly spoke with her boss, and I think that next day he went out of town to a local town because he had a grant program for people with daycare, so he had to go check on some daycare business the next day, he said. So Wednesday, we did a radio interview, and when we got there, he was there. The guy had called him. And so we briefly talked to him, but we really haven't had any conversation with him concerning Clea since. A couple of times we called him and asked if we could come over and look at the office and see where she worked, because we've never been inside. And he said that whenever we would ask, I think we've asked a couple of times, and he would say he had a meeting to go to, or on one occasion he had a meeting to go to, and he said, I'll call you when I get home. And so he called us on Wednesday at 7 o'clock when he knew we were at church, and said, I'm at home now, y'all can come over. He left a message on the answering machine. But other than that, we hadn't had any conversation with him concerning Clea. We did talk to a few of her friends, but because we didn't really know much about the police, but we really hadn't had any dealings with the law. So from what we watched on television, we were going to let the police investigate, do the talking to witnesses. And, they asked us some names of her friends, and we gave them names and addresses of where they could find the friends. And we hadn't even really had any conversation with the friends.
Because I'm thinking about all the things that police do, right? Not all the things, but, just some of the things that they would come in and maybe get DNA. I know it was 26 years ago, but I'm wondering, did they get any of that stuff? You said they have her purse, they have her stuff, contents from her locker. Was there anything else that they did that made you feel good? Was there any searches? Did they go out and look for her? Did you guys go out and look, have certain places you looked? I'm very curious to see kind of what took place within that maybe 1 or 2 week period of her disappearance to kind of figure out what was happening,
We had some searches that Wednesday, I think 2 days later, some of my church members came over, and across the street from his house, even though there's a house on the corner, there's a wooded area right in front of his house. And so some of my church members went in that area and started looking. And then we had a couple of searches with some people in the community. And I kept thinking, we're not going to find her in the woods, but because people wanted to search, we've searched. And I've been in a lot of woods. And, before this, I was like kind of terrified of being in the woods, but we've been in a lot of wooded areas, looking for clues related to Clea.
And through all of that, you guys were never really able to find anything, right?
We didn't find anything, and her boss didn't help us search either. And that's, another strange thing about that, because he didn't help us search. He didn't help us put up flyers. As a matter of fact, he paid people to take down flyers. So he just hasn't done enough to help the police eliminate him as a person of interest. That's their new term.
As far as everyone that the police talked to, they talked to this doctor. They spoke to, was it a male friend and a boyfriend that she had? And that was pretty much the list of people they talked to?
No, just the male friend. And he wasn't a boyfriend, he was just a friend. They talked to him, questioned him, and then they talked to some of her school friends.
So as far as your daughter's information, like her social security number, any of her identification, has anything of her ever been used? I don't know if she had a bank account at the time. I imagine so if she was working. Has there been any activity on anything that belonged to her since that particular day?
There's nothing. Now, maybe a week later, I contacted the FBI and they in Little Rock, because I had contacted our local FBI, and he didn't really seemed to think it was anything of importance. And, I didn't have any proof that she was taken across state lines. And of course, they don't have a body, so it wasn't really of interest. But I called Little Rock, and then the supervisor in Little Rock came down, and that's when the police decided to come over with the FBI guy. And then that's when they got some DNA. Hairbrush, I think toothbrush, a hat, I believe. They didn't get DNA from us. We got DNA. I think we went to an event at the state police headquarters in 2011, I think, and that's when they got our DNA.
They put you guys into names as well, and they have her DNA in there on top of all of that.
Yes, and there's not been any hits on her social security number, driver's license, date of birth, none of that.
Mm-hmm. And the timing of this is very interesting too, because this is 2 weeks before she's about to graduate, right? So she's an honor student and all of that. So she had a lot of things going. So I can't imagine why she would walk away from everything when she had these things planned. What was she planning to do, with her life at that point?
And that was another thing, I guess, that was, I guess, piqued their interest a little bit, because Clea had one of those little daily planners, and she had written in the planner everything that she was planning on doing up until she went to college. And that was graduation. She was going to go to Boston to do an internship because she wanted to be a pediatrician. And of course, whatever days that she was going to work before she went, or potential days to work before she went to college, she had those in her planner. And, and the police were saying, well, it's not like a teenager to have everything that they're going to do mapped out day to day. She was organized in that manner, planning on things that she was going to do. And it was 2 weeks before she graduated from high school. So the 911 guy said, oh, maybe she just went with some friends, because when my son was in high school, he and some of his friends went to Florida for the weekend, and he drew some money out of the bank. And I'm like, but I'm telling you, she didn't have anything, no purse, no driver's license, no ID. And at that time, cell phones were just beginning. And so she didn't have a cell phone or anything like that. We didn't even have, in our area that we live, we didn't even have caller ID. 2 weeks from graduation, you can do whatever you want to do. And she had went to prom on Friday. She went to an Arcanet ball on Saturday. Sunday was Mother's Day. And so what would make her want to just leave with nothing on Monday? It didn't make any sense.
It just doesn't make any sense. So let's fast forward to 2012. Now, 2012 is when there was another development in your daughter's case. Tell me about that.
In 2012, there was someone that had given a statement to the police that they had done some work over at Amos's house. And
now this is the doctor that she was
yes,
working for. And
yes,
let me just ask you really quickly. How long has she been working for the doctor?
about a year.
For about a year. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So tell me more about this situation.
The detectives had gotten a search warrant and went over to search for the whole day. Residents, the grounds, they had a ground radar. Some detectives had gotten a search warrant, and they went over and searched the home. They were there like hours.
According to local media reports and the family, in March of 2012, 18 years after Cleashindra's disappearance, Jefferson County investigators and local police spent 6 hours searching the property of Dr. Larry Amos, who was Cleashindra's employer at the time of her disappearance. But there's still no word on what investigators found. Laurel stood outside and watched for hours to find out what she could.
Someone called me. I was at work, and someone called me and said they're doing a search down at the doctor's house. Well, I had to drop what I was doing and go. And so we were there probably, I don't know if they started like at 8:30, but we were there about 9 till 5 o'clock in the evening. And so, waiting. And then finally they made the crowd like go back. We had to go back a block, maybe two, or a block and a half away from the house. One of the detectives came out with some bags. They had 5 bags of evidence, I guess. And the crime lab lady said during their investigation that she was afraid for her life because there were so many people out there, which that really kind of surprises me, because when there's some type of incident, there's people standing around all the time. When the police come into an incident and people see yellow tape and they see a bunch of police officers, they gather. And so she said she was afraid, and so she gave the bags to the detective. And so they put the evidence in the trunk of one of the detective's cars. And so he went home with the evidence and I guess took off his gun and his police equipment and just closed the trunk up for the weekend. Then on Monday, when he was getting his stuff, he realized that he still had these bags in the trunk of his car. So he took them and put them in the evidence locker. And I don't know what they do with evidence if, the police has to log it in, or what happens when it goes to the evidence locker. But after 30 days or almost 40, I went to the city council meeting to ask the police chief what was going on with our evidence, because I had called a couple of times and they always said, well, we haven't heard anything. And so I went to the city council meeting and I said, so what's going on with our evidence? We haven't heard anything. It's been, over a month. And so she said, oh, we have a standing appointment every Wednesday with the crime lab, and they haven't come up, or they haven't found anything or something, she said. And the next day, the crime lab, I think, was contacted by a reporter. And so the crime lab issued a statement saying that they had not received any evidence on Cleashindra Hall's case. And so once the police started investigating what happened to the evidence, in 40 days, it was still in the police locker. Nobody knew that it was there. And,
Wow.
because I kept thinking, if y'all thought that you had something of importance, why didn't somebody take it right on up to the crime lab? Although it was 5 o'clock, so maybe the crime lab is closed. I don't know. But, and then if that were the case, this was, I think, a Friday. So Monday morning, why didn't somebody take this evidence on up to the crime lab? Because we're trying to find out what happened to Cleashindra Hall.
Yeah, because typically, I can tell you this, because I actually did some work on this in the last year or so. When police get the evidence is supposed to be logged, photographed, or whatever, checked into the numbered, and put into a locker, and then it goes into evidence. So it should have gone into. There's no way that there should have been a 40-day or 30-day process of processing evidence when that's usually happens in a shift. And at the very least, at the latest, it would have happened on that Monday if there were, with the mistakes or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So there was some sort of mishap with this evidence. And what do you know of this evidence now?
All they told me after that was that they didn't find anything. And like I said, it went to the crime lab. It was 40 days. 40 days after the search that the evidence finally got to the crime lab.
How do you feel about that? I mean, this first, for one thing, you wait all these years. She disappeared, 1994. Then some action goes down in 2012, and you guys think you have something going with it. And then all of a sudden, the evidence of whatever it is they gets mishandled. Let's just be honest. That sounds like exactly what happened. And then you're sitting here trying to figure out what's going on. So they go through all of this, and at the end of the day, you get final answers of nothing. How long did it take for them to give you an answer of, oh, we don't have anything?
About 2 weeks for them to say that the crime lab didn't have anything. And that was when I requested a meeting with the mayor and the police chief at the time and the sergeant of the detectives.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this, looking at the time and thinking about where you are, where you live and things like that. Do you believe that this was just a mishap, or do you think it was some racial stuff, like as far as her life not being as significant to some people?
I don't want to think that it was racial, but I mean, when Clea disappeared, they had not had a case like this at all. They've had some missing persons report, because I think from May 1994 to January, maybe there were 75 reports, but those were people that weren't where they're supposed to be, and they all were accounted for. But Clea was still the only person that wasn't accounted for. And so they hadn't had any kind of case like this to happen. And so I don't think that they knew what they were doing. And then the detective that was assigned to us, I really don't think that he knew what he was doing. And it's just different things. Like they went to my daughter's boss's home, and when he was out of town, because he had went to Houston that Wednesday or Thursday and didn't come back till Saturday. So on that Friday, they went to his home and spoke to the wife and said, can we see the office where Clea works? And so she let them look in the office. And so now this was the office with a business phone. He didn't leave town till Wednesday, or leave the state till Wednesday or Thursday. So he should have been using the office phone. And so on the redial, when they pushed the redial and they asked who the person was that answered, they said their name was Smith. So I kept asking and asking who that was. Well, when he came back in town, he went to the police station on Saturday, gave his statement. And so he had started passing our house. There's two ways to go to his house, and one of those he doesn't ever have to pass our house, but he had started passing by our house. And so I was outside talking to one of my friends, and he stopped and asked if we had heard anything, and I told him no. And then he asked me if the school had brought Clea's diploma, and I'm like, no, because we hadn't even thought about any of that. And so he said, oh, and by the way, the police and he gave me this piece of paper, gave me this number on somebody named Smith, and I don't know anybody named Smith. And so I'm like, okay. And, my friend just kind of looked at him kind of strange, so he got in his car and left. But, over time, it may have been a year, when I kept saying, y'all know this, y'all haven't tracked this number. And it turned out to be the lady that had been his babysitter for his son, who was 4 at the time. And she had been his babysitter since he was born. Well, I guess if that's the last person they called, that would be the number on the office phone. It wasn't even the home phone, it was the office phone. So how would they expect Clea, a number that Clea called, to still be on the office phone?
Yeah, like way down the line. That's
From Monday to Saturday, Friday. From Monday to Friday, the last number on the phone would be a number that she calls.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine they can see the phone logs. Like they can look at the phone logs and see, the phone calls that were made while during the time frame of when she was supposedly there. You know what I'm saying? Like, and looking and investigating that.
We all have that same kind of mentality, in that we have to we have to be the investigators. If somebody calls us and say they see something, we have to call the police. And it's over the years, when somebody's called us and say that they have visions, or they know somebody that said something about her boss, then they would question those people like they were the criminals. And and then people wouldn't come forward with anything.
In 2019, local media reports said that there was some speculation about Clea's disappearance and a possible link to confessed serial killer Samuel Little. That's because reports say he might be responsible for the murder of another Pine Bluff woman by the name of Jolanda Jones, who was 26 years old at the time. It allegedly happened just 3 months before Clea vanished, but at this point, there's been no solid confirmation of a connection between the cases by investigators. Tell me about your daughter as far as her personality, just so people get an idea of her as a person, right? So, we know that she was smart, right? We know that you said she wants to be a pediatrician, so she's very intelligent. You said she's on honor roll. What did she like to do? What was her favorite food? Did you guys have anything that you do? Was she your only daughter?
She's my only daughter.
Your only daughter. So were there things that you guys did special together as mother and daughter? Tell me about that.
She liked to read, in addition to being in the band, because she liked music, but she liked to read. But then she was an average teenager, liked to talk on the telephone, and she liked kids. And so she would keep kids in the nursery at church. And then, like, we had nieces or nephews, she would babysit them. And so she had a passion for little children. So that's why she wanted to be a pediatrician.
And so you guys do, what about events? Tell me about yearly events. I know you guys do the balloon release. Tell me about the symbolism of that, and kind of how, the community has, I'm guessing, has kind of helped you guys, deal with things. How is that going?
Of course, in 26 years, we've released a lot of balloons. We released balloons on her birthday. Usually that's just a family gathering. Every now and then, we may have some community people, but it's usually just family. And then on May 9th, we release balloons that we try to get community involved in. We have pins that we wear, and we have T-shirts that we wear. And, but it's been years when somebody has asked, when they've seen it, like when they see us. And because I remember once, maybe in like the 5th year, and this lady saw me in the grocery store, and she said, "Is that girl still missing?" I remember that. Is that girl still missing? And I'm thinking, well, you hadn't heard anything saying that she was found, because just like we put it in the news that she was missing, we would say, she's found. We're having a party, like when the prodigal son comes home. We're going to have a big feast and let everybody know that she's found. But, over time, it's like we don't hear much from people asking about her.
As far as like tips and things like that, I mean, have those pretty much dried up from what your knowledge is? Because I'm waiting to hear back from the police. I've reached out to them a couple of times. As far as you know, like, was there ever anything, just out of curiosity, sighting, theory, any of that?
They may have had some tips. I don't know what they were, or other than the tip for the search warrant. I don't really know what they what leads they may have followed up on. Right now, I know that our case is probably inactive, not closed, but inactive because it's a cold case because nobody's come forward and said, I know what happened. That is just really mind-boggling since she didn't have a car and all of that. So where is Cleashindra Hall?
Has there been any age progression pictures made of your daughter since then? Like, how many of you guys had it? Are you planning on doing a new one anytime soon?
They've only done one age progression, and they started doing one back in May or March, and they sent us one. It didn't look anything like her or anybody that we knew. And so we sent it back, and I guess they're still working on it.
And then the next thing would be, what about a reward for information leading to her whereabouts? How is that going?
When Clea disappeared initially, we had people were donating money. And so this radio station had started advertising. And again, we were naive. And he was telling people, to just bring money to the radio station, for Clea. And so people brought money. I don't know how much money he collected, but he spent all of it. Right now, there's probably a $5,000 reward that our church and our job put up.
So wait a minute, let me get this straight. Wait. So how long after the disappearance did this radio station or whatever start collecting this money? And what did they say they did with the money? What happened?
He did. He I'm sure he spent the money because there were people that said, like this lady that was a patient of mine, she said, our sorority gave a certain amount of money. I'm like, y'all did? So she's like, yeah, it was over $500. And so I'm like, we didn't get it. So we started calling him and saying, where's the money? And he had put out flyers with $7,000, $10,000 reward, but we never did see any of that money. So I called the police and it's like, well, we don't know who gave what amount. I'm like, but what about the people that gave checks? He cashed checks that had Cleashindra Hall Search Fund on them. He cashed those checks. And so I went to the newspaper when I didn't have any help from the police. And I said, if you donated money and you wrote a check, contact me. And so I got some calls from people who said they wrote checks and those checks were cashed because I saw some of the checks where he had just signed his name and cashed the checks. And I don't even know how much cash he had, but over the years, somebody has asked us if we want to do a GoFundMe. But, we felt bad asking people for money when they donated and we didn't have the intelligence enough to
know how that was going. So this is a person who was, I don't know where this person, I'm assuming they're not on the radio anymore.
He's dead.
Oh, okay. No longer alive. Okay. Yes. So wow. So you'll never really know the full answer to that other than the people who donated. And that's horrible, to even have that situation. It's kind of like, wow. Okay.
On top of this, then this.
How long after her disappearance did this money thing happen?
It started like a week.
Oh wow. So really just got on top of all of that.
A week after she disappeared. Mm-hmm.
In our pre-interview, you talked about there were some things that you wanted to clear up. So you had kind of a few things that you wanted to kind of lay out there and that you said were inaccuracies about your daughter's story or about her case. So let's get into those things, just kind of run them down so people understand this needs to be checked.
Okay. One of the things was Clea, I know people saying Clea was the valedictorian and she was going to give the commencement speech, and that's not true. And although Clea was an honored graduate, she was not the valedictorian and she wasn't given the commencement speech. And so I didn't want her story to overshadow the person that was a valedictorian because people work hard to get to that level. And so I wanted to clear that up.
Was it another girl that was the valedictorian who was supposed to?
There was somebody else that was the valedictorian, but I don't remember who that was.
Okay.
Because we actually missed the whole graduation because we had asked the school if they could put a bow on the chair where Clea was going to sit. And they told us no. And I'm like, well, can y'all put a pink ribbon on the robe? And they said no, something about the sanctity of the robes or something. And so we didn't go to the graduation, or my husband and I did, but my son did. And they had her class put a bow on her chair, and then they all put pink ribbons on their gowns. And so we missed it because the school said that they couldn't do it.
Is there anything of hers that you have that you really go to? Because I know I've had parents say they go in and they they remember the scent of their child, they remember certain things. Are there things that you go to?
We packed up most of her clothes, but the Sunday before Clea disappeared was Mother's Day, and so she gave me this card, and I have a scrapbook of things that I have put together over the years that were like her college application, her college letter, accept letter. The school, finally brought us her a diploma. And so, it's just some of those things.
I think it's really important for people to get a perspective and understand that just because time passes, this stuff never gets easier. It never gets easier. If anything, it's even more difficult because you've been living all this time with no answers,
For us, as far as Clea, time just stopped. The day that I watched her walk into her boss's house is the last memory of seeing her that I have. So the time stopped for us. And when somebody asks me how old she is, and I'm thinking she's 40 something, to me, she's still 18. And it's hard to acquaint that to her being 18, but I have 4 grandchildren. They don't know her, but they know we release balloons for their Aunt Clea, and they know that she's not here. But and they've seen pictures, but that's all that they know of her. And so for us, she's still 18.
When it comes to my final thoughts about this case, the first thing that comes to mind is how difficult it must be for Laurel and her family to deal with Clea's disappearance for more than 25 years with no idea of what happened to her. She would have never left her life behind with all of the goals and plans that she had for the future. I'm also very curious as to what police have been able to find over the years in this case. Meanwhile, the family will continue to do their yearly balloon launch while they search for answers. She was last seen wearing a short set with blue polka dots on the shorts and blue stripes on the blouse. She also had on white socks and sneakers and a white ponytail holder in her hair. The case is still under investigation and police are still following up on leads. The family says there's a $5,000 reward for information in the case. I also reached out to Dr. Amos for a comment about this episode, and so far, there's no response. If you have a case that you want me to check out, just visit me on the Intrigued Full Effect Facebook page or email me at intriguedfulleffect@hotmail.com. Until 2021, be safe and stay true. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Intrigued Full Effect, Curious Cases, Disappearances, and Other Stuff podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the host. The primary purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. The host of this podcast assumes no liability or responsibility for any activities in connection with opinions shared in the podcast. The podcast and blog associated with it shall not be used in any legal capacity or as a basis for expert testimony. Any copyright material in the podcast is approved by the owner or is part of the public domain. Music by Pond 5.